Well, good evening, everybody. It is the Lehocky Eagles postgame show. They got waffled 32-9. The season's over. Changes have to come, and we'll see this week what comes. But to review what we witnessed tonight, which was like obscene in front of us, let's bring in the man who covered the game in Tampa for JAKIB Media. He, of course, is the great John McMullen. John, I thought that they had at least one effort left in them, and they could possibly get to a game two where they would get slaughtered by whoever. The notion that this team was broken just continued and manifested itself today. This was a broken team that ended this year embarrassingly, and now you're going to see a rash of changes. What was your view?
Yeah, I was with you. I thought they had one more in them. I thought they were going to perform well, at least against a team that isn't great by any stretch of the imagination, but the Eagles made them look great. And I thought it would end abruptly in the divisional round when you faced a really good team, whether it would have ultimately been Detroit, could have been San Francisco if Dallas won. But, it was a performance that was just awful on so many levels. I think about that first half, and Tampa Bay dominated so much, and they dropped 7 passes. Officially, it was 6. I counted 7, which was the most in a postseason game. In a postseason game, not the first half. In a postseason game since 2006, 17 years ago. If they would have caught those passes, I don't know what this score would have been. It would have been 50-9 or something like that. This was an abject disaster on every level. They were 0 for 11. They didn't convert a third or a fourth down all night. They were just completely dominated by an average football team. I've never seen a worse tackling performance. And when you start talking about tackling, look, tackling is a lost art in the modern NFL in a lot of ways. But man, they didn't look like they were giving effort out there. At one point, it certainly seemed like James Bradbury was benched for a short period of time for non-tackling. Same thing with Hassan Reddick. Other than Devontae Smith, and even Devontae, I think that he had that chance to haul in that one pass at the end. Other than Devontae, I can't point to anybody and say, wow, that guy, he played pretty well. It was a disaster. And I came into this game kind of scoffing at people saying Nick Sirianni was going to get fired. I didn't think there was any chance he was going to get fired coming into this game. I also didn't think they would get beat to the level that they got beat at. And, you finished 6 out of 7. I understand why people are saying it. I'm not going to tell them not to say it. I still think he's going to be back. And I think he's going to be back because I kind of look at things from, where you want to be versus how you get there. So, if you want to fire him, who's the next coach? How are you getting there? And for all the people throwing out the Bill Belichick's of the world, well, then you got to fire the GM. Or is Jeffrey going to fire the GM as well? Maybe. I mean, I can't say he can't. It's up to one guy at the end of the day. But I keep going back to the list, and it just came up because Bill left, quarter century, Pete Carroll left. Here are the longest tenured head coaches with one team in this league. Mike Tomlin, 17 seasons, never had a losing season. John Harbaugh, 16 seasons, has the best team in the AFC. Andy Reid, maybe the second best coach of the generation. Sean McDermott, Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, all 7 seasons. All good teams, playoff teams, good coaches. Zach Taylor, Matt LaFleur, 5 seasons. Good teams, good coaches. Continuity is a big thing in this league. I don't think Jeffrey Lurie wants to be the guy firing people at, with 667 winning percentages in 3 consecutive postseason bursts. but maybe he will.
So what is the fallout then, John, looking at the rest of this and seeing how the players played and to wind down the season, seeing how plays weren't executed throughout the last really 7 weeks of the season, seeing the defense fall apart, seeing them already make a big change defensively throughout the course of the year with just 4 games left. What's the fallout from this point on after this historic collapse?
Well, I think we've learned it, Mark, from Jeffrey Lurie's past, and this is the scapegoat phase of the process, and there will be scapegoats, and I will be surprised if that defensive coaching staff is not completely gutted, and they go in a different direction completely defensively, not only from a scheme standpoint, but all the coaches and the fact that might be a situation where Jeffrey Lurie says, you know what? I don't want your input. Let Howie find the defensive coordinator. So what I think happened today is the clock started on Nick Sirianni. Now the clock is ticking on Nick Sirianni going into next season. If he has another poor season from an expectation standpoint, he's gone. But that's where I think the phases of Jeffrey Lurie is. He's now in the scapegoat phase. You will have scapegoats. There will be significant changes on this coaching staff. There will be significant changes in personnel. There has to be on the defensive side of the ball. They need to get better personnel on the defensive side of the ball. So there's going to be a bunch of changes. And Nick Sirianni is now on the clock, so to speak.
There's also going to be a lot of changes with the veterans. Brandon Graham did say he possibly wants to come back next year if the Eagles would have him. Jason Kelce was very emotional after the loss. You also look at Fletcher Cox. John, to you, out of those guys, who do you think will be back? Because those are huge holes to fill, especially in terms of leadership.
Yeah, I mean, with Jason, and very rare, I mean, Jason was very upset. He did not speak in the locker room, which he always speaks. You know, at the end of seasons, it always seems like that's it for Jason. And then he steps back and he starts going through his life and he says he misses it and he comes back. We've seen that cycle numerous times. This time, Lane Johnson alluded to it again today. He's given a lot of hints that this is it. You know, he might step away again for a couple of weeks and say, I don't want to go out like this on Raymond James Stadium in this type of performance and say he wants to come back. He was an all-pro again for the 6th time, so it's not like he's not playing at a high level. But if I were a betting man, I would say this is it for Jason Kelce. He's got so many outside interests now. That factors into it as well. Brandon, as you mentioned, has already indicated he wants to come back. The Eagles might have to make a difficult decision there. Mr. Eagle, nobody's played more games as an Eagle than Brandon Graham. But, you know, you got to get younger. You got to turn this thing over. Lane's certainly going to be back. He's still playing at a high level. He thinks he has a couple of years left. And Fletcher Cox is going to be interesting. You know, the Jets tried to sign him this offseason, offered him more money, and he came back to Philadelphia. I think he had a very good season overall. I think if someone offers him 2 years, I think he might balk. But, you know, he's proven the Jets offered him $12 million, the Eagles 10. It's pretty significant. He came back. I think he wants to finish his career as an Eagle, but that's going to be a difficult negotiation as well.
John, you and I don't disagree on many things. I disagree on the fact that, you know, and you know, you've heard me say it many times. I'll say it again right now. I'm not ever one to advocate for someone losing or not losing their job, but I think the jig is up on Nick Sirianni. I think he's lost his locker room. I think he's lost his team. I think he's lost his quarterback. I don't think anyone has faith in, you know, their philosophies, and I believe that as an organization, they need some philosophical changes. This whole thought of how you pass the football, you know, and push it down the field even when it's not there. The lack of a running game. DeAndre Swift had 5 carries in the first half, averaged 4 yards a carry, only 5 5 carries in the first half against a team that you previously ran for 200 yards on, and you were always in the game. You were never in a situation where you had to throw the ball. On the defensive side of the ball, they completely fractured this football team with this move from Desai to Matt Patricia. They're void of talent there, and this affects everything. It affects how other free agents look at, whether they want to come to this once great destination of the city of brotherly love to play for a football team that was on the rise, and they're clearly not on the rise anymore. And I think that there needs to be a new voice, a new direction, a new philosophy in every phase of the game in order for the Eagles to move forward. They may even have to be in a rebuilding situation on the defensive side of the football, which may put them in a situation where offensively they've got to score 35 points a game in order to win. That was certainly the case this year. Why wouldn't it not be the case next year? I mean, how many, even if you let Slay and Bradbury go, how much more youthful are you going to get on the outside that will allow you to play a lot more aggressive? They've mishandled the linebacker and the safety position, which obviously needs to be rebuilt. Where does this football team go from here? And why would anybody believe that Nick Sirianni, after 18 weeks of trying to fix it and 19 weeks into a playoff game, hasn't been able to fix it, that he's magically going to come up with the remedy to fix it next year?
Well, defensively, you're going to it's hard to be down. Get much worse. So they're going to have a bunch of new names, and they might be young names, and they might be more athletic, and they might make mistakes, but they're going to be better because they have to be better. Offensively, there were certain broken in this final stretch, 7 games, and it is kind of confounding with the talent that they have. Now, AJ wasn't out there today, but you still shouldn't perform that poorly. We know the blitz issues, the offensive line getting caught, downfield. That's the kind of stuff that bothers me. That's been pretty consistent since Nick has been here. They can't run a rub route, can't run bubble screens, which are staples of the NFL, and most teams can do it at least occasionally. That's the kind of stuff that bothers me. When you can't accomplish simple things, and you keep making the same mistakes again and again and again. However, I also got to take a step back and say, well, all these teams we're talking about are just as inconsistent as the Eagles, with the exception of a couple. They've had up seasons, down seasons. There's not too many teams that have a 667 winning percentage over 3 years, 3 playoff berths. So again, what are we talking about long term? I think people get caught up in the moment. I get it, because this was ugly. And the moment is ugly. But that doesn't mean the other stuff didn't happen. And if they were so god-awful, well, what is the rest of this league? Who can't beat them? The Eagles are going to destination.
Well. John, we're losing your transmission a little bit. Yeah, we kind of lost John. The Wi-Fi in the booth is kind of shut down for him. Seth, I agree with you. I think the one thing that I wanted to ask John, first of all, how Sirianni sounded in the post-game press conference, and I assume he was asked about his job security. Here's the thing that I think John is bypassing. This was a meltdown of epic proportions that the head coach had no ability to curb. It just it spiraled out of control. When you're looking at a head coach, that's one of his responsibilities. You got to stop the bleeding. You got to figure out a way to get that team back together. He was unable to do that. So whatever his winning percentage is, to me, is irrelevant. It's what happened here that showed the true self for me with this head coach.
Well, Nick Sirianni said last week, it's really easy for someone to lead when things are going well. It's difficult to lead when things are going sideways. Leading is one thing, being able to fix the problem. As a head coach, you're the problem solver. You're the chief. You can talk about CEO all you want to. You are the chief problem fixer. That's what your job is. And he has failed miserably at being able to fix that, no matter what the record looks like, no matter what it looks like. And now you're going to have to take a step backwards, especially on the defensive side of the ball, until you can become more talented and rectify the situation. If that's the case, and then Kelsey steps away, you lose a running back again. Now you're back in the running back market. You got all of these question marks. You're still not solidified at your number 3 wide receiver position. I think we can all say, that the Quez Watkins experiment is now over. Julio Jones is done. Olamide Zaccheaus didn't give you what you needed. So, you got all of these areas and all of these pieces that you've got to fix. And you're going to bring –
How committed is A.J. Brown going to be as well?
Well, but
after what happened in the end of the season.
He apparently deleted Eagles pictures off of social media. So maybe he's
matter.
just toying with the fans.
Listen, it doesn't matter. He's $50 million in on $100 million contract. No matter how he feels or what the circumstances are, he ain't trying to mess up $25 million on average next year. So AJ can say whatever he wants to say and delete whatever the hell he wants to delete. He got 25 million problems, and Twitter ain't one, okay?
I think the other thing, too, real quick, is that there's just so many good head coaches out there that are available that I don't know if the Eagles are going to go for them, but if they were to keep Nick Sirianni after this colossal failure and you pass up on any of these guys that we've mentioned throughout this show, it's going to be a really bad look for that organization.
I just am curious to know, they had to have asked him about his job security, right? Some reporter had to ask Nick Sirianni how he feels about whether he's going to survive this, right?
His head is not there right now.
His head is not there, right? Is that what he said?
And they also asked Jalen Hurts about it as well, and he said – he said, I didn't know Nick Sirianni was going anywhere.
Okay, we got John back. John, we're just talking about that whole thing, and I was curious, what was Sirianni's demeanor when he was being peppered with all these questions, and obviously his job security had to have come up. What did you take out of what he had to say?
Yeah, it came up, and obviously, as Mark mentioned, he said he's not there yet, which I get. He said he was worried about the players right now, not worried about himself, all that kind of stuff. He knows the questions surrounding. He certainly talked like a guy who's going to be back. He certainly talked like a guy who thinks he's going to be back. So from that standpoint, most of the players defended him. For those talking about him losing the locker room and all that kind of stuff. Hassan Reddick, Lane Johnson, bunch of guys defended him. So from that standpoint, it certainly seemed like he believes he's coming back. I believe he's coming back. Now, I heard Kayla say there's a bunch of coaches out there. They are. But which one is going to come in the so-called go along to get along position that the Philadelphia Eagles have turned into this head coaching position? That's the part I think people don't understand. Okay, you could say Jeffrey Lurie grew up a Patriots fan. And you could say Jeffrey Lurie wanted to buy the Patriots, and those things are all true. And he has tremendous respect for Bill Belichick. You think Bill Belichick's going to come in here and listen to other people in a collaborative process, tell them who his assistant coaches are going to be, who the players are going to be? Ain't happening. So you got to change your whole organization. And guess what? Most coaches are like that. They want some kind of power. Ever since Chip Kelly, Jeffrey Lurie has turned away from that process. Now, he could always change. We're talking about one person. He could wake up tomorrow and say, you know what? I need to get a head coach who can do it all. And all of a sudden, Bill Belichick is here. But he would have to change his whole philosophy, the whole way he's built this organization. He would have to essentially kick his most trusted advisor back to the broom closet. That's the part I think people aren't thinking out.
Yeah,
there is
John,
no evidence that he has shown that he wants to go down that route.
John, I don't think he has to do that, to be honest with you. What I think he needs to do is he needs to let football people run football and let the coaches coach the football team and separate them. Mm-hmm. There's no reason for the football
that's what they do now. Bill Belichick's not going to accept that.
Bill's
a football guy.
I understand that. Bill Belichick said, hey, I'm open to some changes in how we've operated here in New England, meaning that I don't have to be everything. I don't have to be the head coach, the GM, and everything else. He's open to that. So if you can bring him in as the head coach and they just shut up and leave him alone and let him do what he does best, and that's coach football players, develop talent, and build a roster, and let Howie evaluate and his scouting evaluate players and bring the players in with a little bit of, input from the head coach. That's the way an organization is supposed to be run. The GM is not supposed to be telling the head coach who should play and who shouldn't, who should make the roster and who shouldn't. What the offense, the analytics people shouldn't be telling the offensive coordinator, well, we should be running these plays against this defense because this is what the numbers say. Doesn't work that way. We've lost our way in professional football when we allow that to begin to happen. And this organization has lost its way because that's the way that they operate, John.
Well, then you got to skip over Nick Sirianni, and you got to skip over Howie Roseman, and you got to get to Jeffrey Lurie, because Jeffrey Lurie is the reason this organization is run the way this organization is run.
Okay,
Jeffrey
so I got a question for Jeffrey Lurie. Do you want to win or do you want to continue along this path? And I know that you've been to 2 Super Bowls in the last 6 years, so the prevailing thought is the way you've been doing it is the right way. But this situation that we're looking at right now looks eerily similar to the end for Doug Peterson all over again.
Well, yeah, and that's why I spoke of, and I don't know how much you got of it when I lost my connection, but I spoke of the clock starting for Nick Sirianni because of what happened with Doug Peterson. But when it comes to analytics, that's Jeffrey's baby. And guess what? Because Jeffrey is 72 years old, Julian Lurie is a big part of that. So the guy taking over, that part ain't changing. It ain't changing. So if Bill Belichick wants here, he's got to get on board with that. And by the way, Doug Peterson pushed back on that. And Nick Sirianni pushes back on that at times. That's a Jeffrey Lurie thing. So, when we talk about how this organization is run, make no mistake about it. If you want to blame Nick Sirianni for that, you're crazy. If you want to blame Howie Roseman for that, you're crazy. That goes right to the top. This organization is set up the way it's set up because of Jeffrey Lurie.
All right, Philly fans, you heard it. What you going to do with that?
Farsi?
Be sad. I don't know. How am I supposed to do it?
He has an opportunity to make a change, though.
Meddling owners got numbers for you, football people. Wait till you hear them.
Hey, listen, it's the same situation. How often does the same thing have to repeat itself before you realize that a change is necessary?
Right, but to your point, they're just going to go to another Super Bowl because they know what they're doing.
No, they're not.
Oh, I agree with you.
Yeah,
not with how they played and what they're going to lose next season.
I would venture to say that they caught lightning in the bottle because they hired Doug Peterson. Jim Schwartz is the insurance policy, and all of a sudden, the last thing that they think that is going to happen is that Doug Peterson is going to take this team to the Super Bowl in year 2. Okay, he wins the championship. That was his time to grab a little bit of power.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, and because he's so green.
to be fair to Jeffrey, by the way, the Eagles have won a lot of games over the Doug Peterson and Nick Sirianni era because they've been ahead of the curve analytically against the rest of the league. They have won a lot of games because they were at the forefront and ahead of the curve. And they were the ones who sort of, now everybody is fourth down aggressive. That started with Doug Peterson and the Eagles. And they won a lot of games because they were ahead of the curve. So I can criticize Jeffrey for a lot of things. And one of them is, scapegoating people, as you will see in the coming days and weeks. But one of them is not analytics. This organization, and when you see Alec Hallaby getting GM interviews, and you see Ian Cunningham, who's gone and a step away from being a GM, and Brandon Brown and Catherine Rice and Andrew Berry and everybody else, when people need coaches and when people need executives, they look at certain teams, and the Eagles are in the top 3 of that group.
John,
that's because they win, Kayla. Okay,
they do.
And when I look at the Dallas Cowboys, they've won a lot of football games. How's that worked out for them Cowboys?
They choke all the time in the playoffs. John, real quick, I want to go back to the similarities here between Doug Peterson and Nick Sirianni, because Doug Peterson won the Super Bowl, and then in 2018, the reason why they didn't advance was because the ball went through Alshon Jeffrey's hands. This year, they go to the Super Bowl a season to go, and Nick Sirianni not only loses to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but they get demolished, and they look terrible. So they let go of Doug Peterson. What's not saying they're going to let go of Nick Sirianni? Are they just going to try this out and say, this is our guy for the next 7 years? Let's see what he can do?
No, I think a lot of people forget Doug Peterson was coming back. Jeffrey Lurie agreed to bring Doug Peterson back after, by the way, a 4-win season, not an 11-win season, a 4-win season. And he agreed that Doug was going to come back. And then he wanted a plan from Doug and said, we need improvement at the coordinator's positions. And he came back with Press Taylor, and this is where Jeffrey scapegoats people, and Matt Burke and Corey Unlin, and that wasn't acceptable to Jeffrey Lurie. And Doug said, kind of, F you, let me have autonomy over who I want to be coaches. And then if it doesn't work, fire me then. And Jeffrey said, no, we have to go in a different direction. And that only then was he fired. So if he goes into these season-ending meetings with Nick Sirianni and says, you have to hire so-and-so to be the defensive coordinator, or you have to fire Brian Johnson or somebody he's close to, and Nick balks, then he might fire him. But that's up to Nick. My point is he will bring him back, and he will have demands. And if Nick, bounces back at those demands and says, no, I'm not doing it, then he might fire him.
Well, he's going to accept whatever Jeffrey says. John, listen, yes. Your work has been outstanding all year, and we really appreciate you hanging out late with us, and hopefully we do this again next year with you. Thanks so much for all your contributions. We appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
All right, that's John McMullen. Of course, he's brought to us by Land Rover of Willow Grove, your defender of the game. I don't know who that is. I don't have a defender of the game, but Jaguar Land Rover of Willow Grove has a defender, a new defender. Test drive it. You'll absolutely love it. Presented by Jaguar Land Rover of Willow Grove. We're going to come back, and game balls have not been really a good segment for this show over the past 6 weeks. But we're going to try to squeeze one out before we get out of here for the season on the Lehocky Eagles post-game show live from Ocean Casino. Back after that.
They're carving them up and good play calling along the way. First and goal at the 6.
Field of life, First Trust Bank is there for you. Champions on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Because Philadelphia dreams deserve a Philadelphia bank.